In this video, we're going to take a closer look at PHP variables, specifically looking at how variables work with the print function, and we're also going to look at something called variable interpolation or variable expansion. These will be critical in your day-to-day use of PHP. Before I go on, I just want to let you guys know that we're getting very close to actually doing some very practical PHP work. Very soon, actually, we're going to be processing HTML forms. So if you were starting to get worried that we weren't going to get into anything interesting anytime soon, don't worry. I'm with you on that. I don't like to get caught up in theory so much. My main concern is to get you guys up and running practical PHP as soon as possible. Let's get back to variables, and to help speed up the process, I've written this little PHP script for us, and I want you to take a look at a couple of things. I've created two variables, one called name, and I gave it a value, and another one called name, and I gave it another value. And down here I have the print function printing the word, printing the variable name. So let's launch the browser and we'll take a look at that. I'll just refresh that to make sure we're up to date. So it says Jimmy Fish. So we know the first variable name has a value of Jimmy Fish, so we're printing out Jimmy Fish. Now we have Stephen Meat as the value of the second variable called name. Now the only difference between the first variable called name and the second one is that the second one has a capital N in it. So let's change that to N. I'll save that, refresh the page, and it says Stephen Meat. So at face value, this doesn't seem like much, but the reason I put this up is I just want to point out one thing, that in PHP, variable names are case sensitive. So that means that name, all lowercase, and name with a capital N in it are not the same variable as far as PHP is concerned. It's actually a different spot in memory. If you recall, variables are containers, and variables are also pointers to addresses to spots in your computer, in this case in the server's memory. So when you have a different, even though you have the same name for your variable, in this case it's name, because you have a different case and even one of the letters, it's a different variable. If I created another variable and I gave this a capital A, this would be yet another variable pointing to another spot in memory. Having seen how case affects variable names and how they actually are different variable names depending on the case, I would strongly suggest that you don't use different cases for your variable names. I would just keep them all lowercase. It just makes it cleaner and easier to read. And there are other reasons in PHP why you'd want to keep your variable names in lowercase. While we're here, one thing I'd like to point out is when you are naming your variables, try to use descriptive names. So if the variable name in this case is meant to hold a name, that's a good name for the variable name. But if the variable name was actually going to hold somebody's address, then to call it name would probably be a bad idea. You'd probably be better off calling this address. This way, when you're looking at your variables, whether it be, as you're working on the script at that time, or maybe a month later or 6 months later when you look at the script, the variables will make sense. One of the big mistakes that junior programmers make is that they will name their variables using stupid names that don't describe the information that the variables are going to be holding. And whatever you do, for heaven's sakes, don't give variables single letter names like this. You can do it, but this doesn't tell us anything about the variables, and it just causes us huge headaches down the line. Let's move along in our exploration of PHP variables. I want to get into some a little bit more practical, hands-on type of things that some of you may have been wondering about. So let's just get into it. Right here I've created 3 variables. Notice how I name the variables, how I use the underscores in between the names so it's easy to read. Notice how they're all lowercase. You notice how the variable names are representative of the data that we're holding. in that, well, for example, name last, this is my last name, holds my last name, name first, and holds my first name, and so on. So again, this makes it easy to read the script later on and to work with it. So here I've created 3 print functions to print out the variable values. Let's launch the browser and take a look. So here they are printed out on the screen as we expected. Now there's a problem here. If you notice, there's no spaces between our variable name. Let's see if we can fix that. One way to do it would be to use more print functions and print spaces in between. So notice quotes are actually opened up like this, so that creates an actual space. Save that, refresh the page, you notice we have spaces. But again, this is very, very clumsy and very clunky way of printing out variables, especially if you want to put them all on the same line. So I'm going to show you how to do something called concatenation. What this is a way to combine text inside one print statement or one print function on the same line. I'll show you and you understand what I'm talking about. Through the magic of video, I basically stopped recording and I wrote out the script for you so you could see it. Let me just actually delete this last one here and this little spot dot here, and I'll explain to you what's going on. So first we have our print statement, and I have our first variable name, a period, a space, right? We got our quotes, and another period, the second variable name, and a period and a space. So when used in conjunction, like we see here in this combination that we see here rather, the period is what you would call a concatenation operator. Remember that this was the assignment operator. If there's an equal sign, it operates on this particular value, which is the name Mischuk. This is called a concatenation operator. What this basically does is strings together, if you will. It puts them together in a row. So this, when PHP comes across the period, it knows that you want to combine whatever is being held in this variable with this space here. This could also be other text. You could put a dash, for instance. And now then it comes across this other period, which is a concatenation operator again. And it adds in this value, this variable value here. And then we're adding again another space here. So let's say we want to put in our last variable, which is name last. All we have to do is put the period, and I've just cut and pasted in place. We'll save that, and let's take a look how this looks like in our browser. And here we go. We have our street name, first variable. We have the dash that we put in. If we scroll back, see, remember I put the dash here, and then our name first, Stefan, and our last name, well, my last name, Mischuk. So here we've learned yet something new. We've learned our second operator. The first was the equals, the assignment operator, which we use the equal sign to build. And now we've used the second operator called a concatenation operator, which allows you to string variables together and print them on the screen. Now this is pretty cool and makes life easier than the previous method we saw, having print commands or print statements on different lines. There's something even easier than this when printing values to a screen. Alright, so here I've created another print command, and let me just put double quotes around here. You notice that I have double quotes surrounding the whole statement now, whereas up here I had no quotes at all. But you notice I have the first address and I have the word first variable, which is the address, second variable, then the word there, and then the variable name. So, variable last name. Let's create a separation between these two. So I'm going to print a couple breaks. I'll save that. Let's preview that in the browser. So we got this error, parse error, unexpected tprint on line 20. This is the PHP engine telling you that the script you wrote is not kosher. So what we have to do is go back and take a look at our mistake. I don't know if anybody can figure this out. On our second line we put in here, I forgot to put in the semicolon. If you recall, you always got to put a semicolon after the end of every statement in PHP that tells PHP that this is the end of your command on this line. So we got that error because we didn't have that here. So I've put it in place. I'll save. Let's refresh again. And here it goes, it works. You notice we have our first line, which was built using this line of PHP code. And then we have our second line, which is built using this print command. Now, of course, being able to use print like this, where we just put our variable name and type in any words we want in between the variable names, is much easier than having to have dots and spaces and more dots. And it's much easier than using the concatenation operator. This here is called variable interpolation or variable expansion. And this is used, and we're using something very special in PHP, which is made possible by the double quotes. Now we're going to delete this here now. As an experiment, I'm going to remove the double quotes and turn them into single quotes, and we'll take a look what it does to our page. Now this is going to disappear, of course, because I removed that first print command. What's very interesting here, it works, there's no errors, but you notice instead of printing out the value of street address, we now actually just get the variable name. Again here with this variable, and again here with this variable. So what this tells us is that single quotes around these commands here versus double quotes around this text rather has a very different function. I'll just save that with double quotes now, and I'll press refresh, and all of a sudden our text changes, because now PHP, instead of printing the actual name of the variable, it's printing the data that's contained in the variable, right? So now instead of showing street address $street underscore address as it did before with the single quotes, it's actually writing in the value that's stored in street address, which is 123 secret name. And it continues to do this with the variable name underscore first and the variable name underscore last, right? Stefan and Mischuk. So this leads us to another very important and very powerful tool in PHP, variable expansion or variable interpolation, depending how, I don't even know if I said that right, I think so, but we'll just call it variable expansion. Essentially, when you use a print command and use double quotes like this, you can just put in your variables like so, and PHP is smart enough to know that you are looking for the actual value held in those variables. If you use a single quotes, it actually just prints the variable names but doesn't actually expand them to give you the value. So the process of variable expansion is essentially looking for the value that's held by the variable and then printing it to the screen for you. Again, through the magic of video, I've made some changes to the script on the page here so we can move into the last section on variables. If you notice, I created a new variable called number and I assigned it a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You notice this time the variable doesn't have quotes around it. And whereas with all the other variables we've created thus far, we've actually put quotes around them. Now I've included this new variable at the end here, and I'm going to save that, and let's take a look at it, what it is. Hit refresh, and here we have it printed on the screen. So what we've learned now is that you can store variables that are numbers, you can store numbers inside of variables without using the quotes. And one last point I want to make about variables, again, you notice I've taken off the quotes on the names here, on the text, so you can do that as well with text. So you can surround them with quotes as we did before, or you can leave them loose like this if you will, but it's better with text that you do surround them with quotes. It's considered better practice. There's much more about PHP variables that I didn't cover in this video, but I didn't want to cover everything because then I would just bore everybody to death. All joking aside, if you try to cover everything, guys are just going to get confused. So I covered what I think is all that we need to move forward with PHP. If we come across anything in particular about variables in our PHP work, I'll take care of those issues later on. But again, we're ready to move on to the next subject, which will allow us to process HTML forms. We're going to look at something called arrays.